Hi, I'm Coach Yeager, head coach at Mount Brook High School, and you're watching Average Joe's Sports Talk. Coach Yeager, head coach, Mount Brook football.
Coach, I really appreciate you allowing us to come in. Coach O and I came in here and got a tour of the facilities before we get started, and it's a remarkable place and a very unique situation you have going on here. It's second to none in the state, and the opportunity I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for that. Coach, how I'd like to start this off is how I like to start off with most coaches, for those who do not know who you are, maybe across the state or the nation that watches our interviews and things. Can you give us a little background about yourself, where you grew up, what that looked like, and when you first got into sports as a youngster?
Okay. Well, I'm from a small farming community in North Alabama in Coleman County called Fairview. My dad was a Korean war vet and had, after the war, had gone to work with in Michigan in the auto industry and then for NASA. And as soon as we landed men on the moon, he came home and started doing what he really wanted to do, which was farming and raising boys. And so we worked from sun up to sundown, had chores before school, after school. And when I was 12 years old, I asked him if I could play football. And I was shocked when he said yes. And years later, I asked him, why he allowed me to play football, because, we were going to be working on that farm. And he said that he thought football might be the only place that I could learn lessons that he couldn't teach me. And football was always high as far as the values of what you could learn from that. So that's how I got into sports. And I knew the first time I put on a helmet, I knew I wanted to coach. When I found out you could I did when I was 12 years old, and I found out that you can make a living and you could have a career coaching. From that point on, I wanted to be a football coach, and I would do whatever was necessary, whatever they told me I had to do to be a football coach.
So what was it that clicked and the emotions you was feeling probably when you were playing that led to you thinking, did you just love the game that much, or you just like the camaraderie of a team, or what was it that made that decision?
Bo, that's a great question. I loved and still do. I loved everything about football. I loved the early morning practices. I loved the smell of those shoulder pads. I love the first time you put on the jersey. I love, everybody talks about loving, the game day. I mean, I absolutely loved everything about the game of football. I love the strategy of it, even as a player, learning about it, how you had to work with other people. And, it was just, I just fell in love with it. And just being a part of it, it gave me a feeling like nothing else. And I still feel that today. But I tell everybody, I love the sticking your sore ankle in a cold ice bath. I mean, the things that people hate about the sport, I loved everything about it and still do.
That's awesome. Who in those early years was someone that sticks out in your mind, even to this day, that resonates, that kind of helped mold you or really influenced you, someone you really looked up to back then, coach-wise?
Well, growing up, my dad, he allowed me to, we had a neighbor, he was a old German guy that was a farmer, and he allowed me to work on his farm part-time. And he had two sons that were football coaches. One was in Georgia and one was in Alabama. And his name was Evan Hoxtoller, and his two sons were Dwight and Evan. And so anyway, I worked for him, and they had a big influence on me. I mean, that was sort of a place for me to go, and they knew my passion. They knew that I wanted to be a coach one day, and even at an early age, we would sit around and we would work on that farm. And they would talk football when they were home visiting their dad. And I just love that part of it. I love hearing, about the strategy behind the scenes, what goes into coming up with a game plan and that kind of thing. So that was a big influence in my life.
No doubt. And working on a farm and doing it at the same time, your dad would be happy.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
No doubt. Now, Coach, you've coached at the college level and you've coached at the high school level. In your words, what is the difference between the two, the main difference? For people who's watching this, what would you tell them the main difference between the two is?
It's a great question. if you take a green tree and you tilt it a certain way, it's going to grow that way. And I think the younger you can get a player, the more influence that you can have on a player. I think a lot of times in colleges, you're trying to recruit character. In high school, you're trying to develop character. And the college was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. The level of competition, the emphasis on having good teams and whatnot. But I think in high school, it shifts a little bit. It's more of a community involvement. It's more, since I've been here, I've been here 22 years, and I'm coaching now, younger brothers and second, third generation players, and I can even see some children of former players that are coming up through the ranks and about to get to us. And so just watching a player grow up from our little league, our rec league, all the way through into junior high, and then coming up to me. And so by the time they get to me, I personally know them, and so it's a multi-year relationship that you're developing with a high school athlete.
No doubt. Now, I know you've had several stints in different places and states. You actually coached in Georgia as well. When you talk Mountain Brook, to my last knowledge, I may be incorrect on this, you probably know better than I, but if I'm not mistaken, this high school has accounted for 122 state championships. Is that correct, or in that ballpark in all sports?
I think that's right.
So I'll say that to say this: you're talking about a commitment to excellence. That is Mountain Brook. I mean, when you think Mountain Brook, that's what you think. When you got the job here, first of all, I'd like to know how you got the job here and what led you here. We kind of talked about it a little bit off the camera. And then, did you look at this job as like, this is going to be a tremendous challenge or a great opportunity? Which way did you look at it?
Well, when I came here as an assistant with Joey Jones, I was coaching in Georgia, and like we talked about before, it's the most enjoyable. It's an incredible football school. Where I was coaching, there was a lot of players from our school that had ended up in the NFL colleges, and we'd had a lot of success. But the thing that appealed to me at Mountain Brook was, the players and the people that were here. When I first came over here and Joey introduced me, then, I could envision, my boys that I were raised and growing up to be like those boys that were in the program at that time. I'd been an assistant coach for 7 years, and Joey left to go to Birmingham Southern to start the program over there. And so they offered me the head coaching job. And to be honest with you, initially I turned it down. I did not envision seeing myself as the head coach here. I was very comfortable being the offensive coordinator and coaching the offensive line. And so our principal, who's the superintendent now, we went for a walk, and he told me, it comes down to one thing: do you want your circle of influence to increase? And that appealed to me, and that's why I took the job, and that was sort of my goal as far as taking the job. And so, it's one of those situations. It's probably one of the best things that's ever happened to me because of just being in the job, how it's given me the opportunity to grow.
There we go, no doubt. Now, Coach, one thing I've noticed about you and doing some research on you myself is you're a big culture guy and building that culture. And when you took over as the head coach here, I actually watched your video about bamboo, which was very interesting, and I would have never in 1,000 years imagined that. And Coach O and I both watched it on the way down here. I let him see it for the first time. But long story short, if you can put into words, and I know you can speak, you have whole classes on it, but talk about your culture here and the roots of it and what you've established here.
Well, to me, when you look at players, and over the years, they've come up with tools and methods of testing a person's speed. You can measure a person's height and weight. There's so many ways that you can measure and evaluate a player and try to predict future success or failure. And one of the things that they have never been able to measure is what's on the inside: a person's heart, a person's drive, a person's will. They still don't know how to measure that. But when a person's got it, you know it when you see it. And so, the thing, if that's the difference, if that's the biggest difference, well, how do you develop that? How do you develop the drive in a person? How do you develop the will in a person, the strong will and the competitive spirit? And to me, I believe that a football team is it's a web or a network of relationships. And from every relationship, there's either positive or negative energy. And your collective energy is what we coaches call chemistry. And so for us, it's really about how do we develop relationships within the players to where they're willing to sacrifice for one another. I think one of the greatest sentences of all humankind is greater love has no man than this, that one lay down his life for a friend. I mean, that's the greatest force, the greatest power on the planet. If we can get our players to where they care enough about one another, and guys have a hard time, expressing with our words what we mean to each other. We have a difficult time with that. But what we will do is we'll fight for one another. And so if we can develop that chemistry or that relationship within them, that positive energy, to where they're willing to serve one another and sacrifice one another, and we can translate that to the field, I think it's a beautiful thing when you see a whole team willing to do that for one another. I don't think there's anything greater than that. So here, our motto here is, the strength of the Spartan is the warrior decide. What that means is the guy beside me, I'm working for him, I'm playing for him. Every day it's for him. And the thing that motivates me is I know that he's doing the same thing for me. And so that's the culture. And I think if they learn that, no matter what they do when they leave this program, I think that's the essence of being significant in life. And we tell them, it's not just about being successful. If you're successful, your accomplishments will die with you. If you're significant, your influence, your impact in this world will long outlive you,
Absolutely. And you also do a lot of reading yourself as well. What are some of the books that really sticks out to you that is kind of that you can relate back to team or work? You know what I mean? Pretty much books that have driven you or opened your eyes to different things.
I love that question, and I love sharing books that I like to read. My players always are asking me for recommendations on books, and then they're always giving me recommendations. One of my favorite ones during the pandemic, it was just a life-changing book that I read, was Atomic Habits by James Clear, and it's talking about just making a 1% improvement every single day over a long period of time can have a huge impact in your life. And during that time, I lost 40 pounds during that time. I practiced that book. That's a book that you just don't read. You got to take it, and as you read it, you have to practice that book. You have to live that book. And so to me, that's a life-changing book from a standpoint of just, just an individual. And then there's another great book that I love is On Fire. That's a great book by John O'Leary. And then It All Goes Back in the Box, and that's based on a story about this young man who was their family was very competitive in Monopoly, and so he was always losing. So he had a neighbor that taught him how to play Monopoly, and so he became the winner. And he said at the end of being the winner, he just wanted to celebrate and enjoy it. But at the end of the game, everything went back in the box. And he says that's pretty much how our life is. We can sit there and we can try and win trophies and win rings, but at the end of the day, they're going to tarnish, they're going to rust. It's all going to go back in the box. And the only thing that's going to be left is the influence that we have on people. So that's one of my favorite books too that I like for players to read. I love The Road Less Traveled, 7 Habits of a Highly Effective Person. I like Hal Urban's books. Just read a book, this book I just read is an incredible book. It's called The Last Era. It's by Erwin McManus. So, man, you get to talking about books now. That's what I'm passionate about, because I feel like, you're getting to sit down and visit with authors. During the pandemic, I told somebody the other day, I started counting up, and over the pandemic, in the last year, I read 22 books.
Man,
and
wow.
And every one of them have been impactful. So I love to read and love to learn.
That is awesome. Now, Coach, I want to talk to you about your coaching style now. I want to kind of switch gears over into that. You're a very analytical guy. Coach O'Brien's told me about how you break down things into percentages, even so much even into the weight room. You break down percentage. Can you talk about that style and where that came about? Was it some trial and error that you've done that you figured out formulas to be successful?
Well, that's a great question. The one thing that coaches do is we learn, it's consistent in athletics, is patterns. It's human nature. We have repetitive patterns. I do, everybody does. And then one of the most important things is successful people have repetitive patterns. And so you can study what successful people do, or the high achievers do, or the people that, they surpass whatever their ability is. And there's commonalities in that can be studied. And it can also be charted. It can be studied. And the great thing is, if you can learn whatever that formula is, then it can be repeated. And so, anyway, I think that's the value, of trying to, of studying, breaking down, and doing those things. The great thing is I've been surrounded. I've got guys on my staff. I've got Chris Canoyer, Shane Stearns, all those guys, that work with our players with their performance improvement, whether it's a strength, conditioning, whatever that is. And they're as good as there is, and they're very analytical as well.
I say you're growing that culture of using these numbers as well. You're going to have engineers on those. Now, your personal baby, so to speak, is your offensive line coach. You're widely regarded as the Yoda of offensive line. I've heard other coaches in the state say that before. You run a very successful O-line camp that's huge. Can you talk about that and how that came about?
Sure. Well, number one, when I was first started in coaching, I coached with a guy named Greg Johnson who'd been around in coaching. He was very successful, and he took me to the national convention that year that was in Nashville. I was coaching at Austin P at the time. And so anyway, I got to have dinner. We sat down, and the dinner was Coach Bill McCartney, who used to be at Colorado, and that was right before they won the national championship. And so anyway, he's sitting at the meal, and so for some reason he just sort of targets me. He knows I'm a young coach, and so he starts talking, what do you want to do? What are your goals and stuff like this? And so very quickly into the conversation, I said, Coach, what advice would you give me? And he said, I would give you this advice. He said, number one, either coach offensive line or secondary. He says, if you're an offensive line coach, he says, you'll never be unemployed. He says, if you're a secondary coach, you won't be unemployed very long. And he said, that's like the science and math of coaching. He said, it's just in such demand. And so I took him at his advice, and he said, be the guy and study it. And so, and be the guy that people come to for answers and stuff. And so that was sort of a goal. And I'd read, John Maxwell talks about Earl Nightingale. He says, if you will, for 1 hour a day, if you'll study a subject for 1 hour a day for 5 years, you'll become a master at it. And John Maxwell said, for 38 years, I've been studying leadership. I'm still not a master. Well, I feel the same way about offensive line. And so at a very young age, I started going, at that time to the what I thought was a great offensive line coaches, the Neil Callaways, the Jim McNally's, the Howard Mudds, and just really studying the game and not only seeing what they were doing, but how they were doing it. And I just love it. I love what it takes to be an offensive lineman. It's a game inside a game, because those guys, they never get to touch the ball except for one guy, and he just gets rid of it. And then they go down the end of the corner of the end zone, as Chan Gailey says, and they play in the mud, And, but you got to have a servant heart. And it's more, offensive line is more about attitude, and it's more about your mindset. And to me, you see people that do all kinds of different, techniques and different philosophies on play. But the one thing that's consistent in offensive line play is you cannot be an offensive lineman unless you have a heart of sacrifice. And, and a lot of times, we don't get the offensive linemen, they don't get the approval and the accolades and the recognition within the crowd or on a big stage, but you get it in that room. And that's so important. It's so big that when you come in the room and you do a job and you do it well, and everybody in that room knows that, and that's all that matters,
Coach, that is an amazing way to look at it. And when you specifically are coaching offensive linemen, you're a big physics guy, and you use that in your coaching method. How do you coach your offensive lineman personally? Like when you got your hands on them, what are some of the things that a guy has to do to play offensive line for you?
Well, great question. That's an incredible question. Well, I believe in coaching in a progression. And so a progression is you learn these skills that are very easy to perform. And as you get good at these skills that are easy to perform, they become more complex and harder to perform. Well, as a coach, you don't advance a player. You advance him on whatever his pace is. In other words, when he can perform these skills, well enough, then you advance him into more difficult skills. And so, for an example, we break our pass progression down into posture, position, punch. And so, and there's some guys, that have been playing offensive line, for, 8 or 10 years. And there's some guys that's new to the position, some guys that come up and they're young or whatever. And you just have to start them at ground zero. But and that's what I love. I love taking a guy that really doesn't know the position, and he's really raw and he's green. And everything that you do on offensive line is learned. Nothing comes natural. You spend your whole, you spend your first 2 years of your life, getting out of the floor and getting your hands off the ground and being able to stand upright. And then they come to me and I put that hand back on the ground. I teach them how to live and how to play with their hand on the ground. And everything you do on offensive line is counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive to put your body between somebody that means harm to somebody else and protect them, and so you have to teach them that mindset. But I love teaching everything, the systematic, the attitude, everything in a progression from easy to hard, and seeing these guys progress. I love more than anything else too that when they graduate and they come back and they still talk about those things. So I've had guys that have played, and they've been gone 10 or 12 years and they still come back and they talk about that progression. So I know it's been ingrained.
Absolutely.
It's a lot of them coaching our little league too, so that's fun too.
That's really awesome. And widen the picture a little bit outside your offensive line. I've watched your offenses from afar, obviously on TV and studied some, and it's very unique offenses, with the shifts and motions and misdirections and things you guys do. Coach, in your words, I know what the end game is, but when you are doing those things, what is your ultimate goal when you do the motions and the shifts and everything? What is your ultimate goal with that?
Well, we're really trying to play to the strengths of a Mountain Brook football player. I feel like that it's, for us, we say that the thing that matters the most is the gray matter. And so we're trying to use all that storage space that we can. And so what we do is we try to come up with a system where, our players do things before the ball is snapped to make whoever we're playing do mental gymnastics. And so what we think is if I've got a player and he's a 4'8", and we're playing against a guy that's a 4'5", and all of a sudden he's got to think, am I lined up right? What was that? They'd never seen that before or something. Then maybe he's no longer a 4'5", maybe he's a 4'8", and now we've leveled the playing field. And then the other thing too is, we try to find the adjusters and create assignment conflicts with them. We try to, get numbers matchups for it. And so those are things our guys, we should be able at Mount Brook to be able to count and get a numbers advantage, or at least equal numbers, and never be at a disadvantage. And so we just don't want to waste snaps with bad plays, with bad numbers. And so we feel like those things, a smart, intelligent football player, can handle those things. We felt like we've never overloaded them. So.
Absolutely. And Coach, another thing that I know you're well known for, coaches have probably given the right arm to get a hand on your wristband. Can we talk about that a little
Sure.
bit, Coach? And where did you come up with that on your own, or did you get it from someone else, or where did that come about, your wristband package that you have?
Well, it evolved from when I was coaching in Georgia. We had some guys that had a couple of guys that played both ways. One played defensive end, one played tight end for us. And so we developed a wristband for him. And so all we'd do is they'd tell him what number it was, and he'd look at his wristband, and it had his specific, exact assignment on there, like block down, block the man on you, whatever it was. And it was a very simple, very, very simple, version of what we do today. And so when I, at the very end of the year, when I was in Georgia, we evolved to put more players in a wristband, because what it did was they could just look at the assignment, and they didn't have to think, and they didn't have to interpret, and they didn't have to. Remember what we did was we just basically said, okay, let's take a play like we're scripting, tell them where to line up, tell them what to do. And then it got to tell them where to line up, tell them where to shift, tell them where to motion, and what to do. And so it evolved to a thing where each play was scripted out. And so the only thing I do, I don't have to know what the other 10 do. All I've got to do is look at mine and know what I do. And then when you put them all together, number one, it's just pretty neat mosaic of a play. But at the same time, for those players, the only thing they have to know is their skill. And we say we're going to limit you to learning 6 skills, and that's it. And you're going to get great at those 6 skills. And so it's really skill based.
Coach, you keep those wristbands locked in a vault. How like Pepsi does a special recipe. It's somewhere on campus. Now, Coach, I want to ask you a question. This is a unique question. I don't know if you've ever been asked this before, and I'd like to hear your answer on this, because you seem like a guy that also holds yourself accountable. How do you evaluate yourself at the end of each season?
Man, what a great question. That's a great question. Well, I do have, I think it's really important to have mentors. And I have my mentors. And so at the end of every season, I try to evaluate every corner of our program and say, what are we doing right? Where do I need to improve? And I go to, the people that I consider my mentors, and I say, look, talk to me, how can I improve? What can I do better? And so the other thing I do is, I talk to our athletic director, Benny Eves, a person I consider a mentor for me, and there's probably not a lot of head football coaches that can say this, but, my superintendent, I consider him a mentor of mine. He was an assistant principal here when I started out as an assistant coach. We sort of come up together. He started as an assistant principal, went to the principal, then the superintendent, but we've kept a strong relationship throughout. So I'm constantly asking him, areas that I can improve in, because he gets to see me from a different perspective. And I do the same thing with our athletic director. I'm open to their criticism, whatever. But and the other thing too is I try to, as far as just learning in my reading and stuff, there are things that come out that are very evident in areas that I need to improve. And there's areas that I look at and I know that I haven't done a good job in. There's areas I know that I failed in, And so a lot of times in my studying, my reading, that comes out, and that's always a challenge to me too. But that is an incredible question.
Yeah, I like to ask coaches that sometimes just to see, the really good ones always have some version. It's always a different answer. Now, Coach, here's another something that I'd like to ask you. Where do you think you've personally grown the most over your career, not only as a coach, but a person in general from the game of football?
Well, I think the biggest, I know exactly the answer to that. It's very easy answer. It's not easy to do, but it's an easy answer. I think I've grown in my relationships, in developing relationships, and understanding that, with players, how, the coach-player relationship and developing that and how important that is. The other thing too is I think my perspective of what this game is all about has grown too. I know that, winning is incredible. I mean, there is just nothing like a locker room after a win on Friday night. I mean, it is hard to compare. There's probably not much on this planet like a locker room. But the other side of that coin is, to me, this sport and this profession is about adding value to the lives of young men and other people. And not just that, is everybody in our football family. I want to add value to the lives of our parents. I've grown in that area too. I do believe that this is about our players, and it's not about our parents. And our parents know what the role is. But at the same time, I want our parents to be involved to a point. We give them roles and stuff, but I want the whole family to walk away from this. And I want 10, 20, whatever many years from now to say, that experience made me a different person. That experience, like I said, added value to my life.
No doubt. And being as successful as you have been, and you said at the age of 12 you knew you wanted to coach. Coach, think about something for just a second. If you had this game taken away from you, what on earth do you think you'd be doing if you was not a football coach? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, I'd probably train gladiators or something.
UFC.
Yeah, something. I think I could be very happy being, just teaching in a class. I love teaching. To me, it just so happens I teach the sport of football. I think teaching in a high school class, or teaching in being a professor in a college, I think those things would be another thing too. When you talk about, I've learned enough. I think it'd be neat to be something like a counselor to help people with their problems. So when you ask that, I think it would still be human, related, needs related, relationships and growth related. Seeing people become the best version of themselves somehow.
No doubt. Now, Coach, what motivates you the most at this point in your career?
Wow.
Your biggest motivation?
Biggest motivation is, my faith is big, and knowing that, what we have here, this is not the end. This is just, my faith is huge as far as just every day making sure that that I honor my Creator, that I'm faithful, and that and I've been so blessed. I think about my career and, where I started and where I am now, and I'm in a dream position, and I know that. I never take it for granted. I'm extremely thankful for being the head football coach at Mount Brook. Every day I consider myself unbelievably blessed, but I didn't do this. I'm not a self-made man. I think that I was placed here. I'm very much aware that I was placed here for a purpose, and I want to make sure that I'm faithful to that purpose. So when it's done, it will be, well done, good and faithful servants, what I want. Now, I fail at that a lot of times, but that's ultimately what I want. I hope that the opportunity that I've been given, that I'm faithful to that opportunity. That's a great motivation for me.
I love that answer. That was awesome right there. And as kids leave your program, and you talked about this a little bit earlier, what do you hope they take away? What is the main thing you want? Hey, he played here with me. He was part of this program. And as he moves forward in life, what do you hope he takes away from this?
Wow, what a great question. Well, I'll tell you this, Bo. Last night I got to attend a ceremony. One of my former players was his commissioning. He just graduated from West Point. He was being commissioned and he was being sworn in. So I got to attend that ceremony last night. And so he's up there talking, and man, I'm tearing up, and I'm thinking to myself, I got to be a part of this guy's journey, and I get to thinking about so many of those guys some of them have been in the ministry, and I've been there when they were ordained. Some of them have gone into education, some have gone into law, some of them have gone into medicine. And I think about all the incredibly wonderful players and wonderful young men that I've got to be a part of and be a part of that journey. And I guess the biggest thing, there's a few things. One is I hope that they will look back, and I hope that instead of just having this general statement, well, he cared for us, I hope that they can think of an encounter, a one-on-one encounter, and they can say one day to their children, whatever, Coach Yeager said this. This is what I learned from that football program. And they can specifically state that, something that made their life better. There's a saying that says, man lives as long as another bears a seal of his influence. And so I think that's true. And so I want players, I hope that one day when they return here, I hope that they remember the strength of the Spartan as the warrior at his side. I hope that that's how they do their business, their family. But the things that, we just try to ingrain in them. And then the other thing is, I hope they live a life of significance and not success. I hope they live a life where they're making a difference in other people's lives. And whether they're in the military, the ministry, education, law, medicine, whatever that is, I hope they're impacting lives and lives of difference, and they're adding value, to the lives of other people.
That is a really good answer on that one as well. I love that. And Coach, will tail end off that. What do you hope you are remembered for when you leave this place and you retire? I don't know when that'll be. I'm pretty sure you're going to be reading a book somewhere, relaxing. But when you walk away from the game of football and retire, what do you hope people remember you for most?
Well, that's a great question too, Bo. The thing I hope that I'm not remembered for most is football. I hope the thing I'm remembered least for is football. And I hope that I'm remembered mostly, on the relational side. And, for some kids, it means a lot to me when they come in here and they're having, issues in their life with, whatever it is, whether it's a girlfriend, family, whatever it is, and you can stand there sort of as a counselor in an advisory role. And I hope that they remember those things, but I hope they remember me as a man and not just as a coach. I think more about what I hope I'm not remembered for. But anyway, I hope that they remember me beyond more than just being a football coach.
Well, Coach, it's been an absolute pleasure, and it's been incredible. It's an eye-opening interview for myself. I love your answers. It's a different view of the game of football in general, and it's not even really about football. It is, but it's not. Just from hearing you talking, I really appreciate it. Thank you for letting us sit in with you, Coach.
Well, Bo, I've really enjoyed it. And those may be some of the best questions that I have ever been asked ever. I've done a lot of interviews, but that was one of the best ones ever.
Coach, I appreciate that. I put a little bit of an effort into this when I did some research on you, but the answers are equally better than my question. I can assure you that, Coach.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.